My name is Derek Kauanoe. I'm a 2008 graduate of the William S. Richardson School of Law, and I'm currently a PhD student in the Political Science Department at the University of Hawaii. Professionally, I work at Kahuliao Center for Excellence in Native Hawaiian Law at the law school, where I handle its community outreach efforts. But just to be clear, I am not here representing Kahuliao. I'm here in my individual capacity as a researcher. My presentation today is fairly brief. There are 2 points that I want to emphasize. And the first is that modern day laws and policies applying only to Native or Aboriginal Hawaiians is consistent with Hawaiian Kingdom law and policy. And the second point is that any measure of sovereignty or governance should not be seen as the destination we want to reach, but rather the vehicle we use to restore, improve, and protect the lives of our people. Now, you may be wondering why I want to emphasize this first point. There's been a misinterpretation of our legal history by people in our state and outside of Hawaii who would rather see the end of all Hawaiian programs, all Hawaiian agencies. And they use or misuse our history, and it's changing the discourse facing our community. About 2 Sundays ago, the Star Advertiser printed an editorial that I wrote. The point I was trying to make is that one of the candidates for the at-large seat for OHA had contributions from people who've been vocal opponents to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. If it was up to them, they would rather end the department. Another donor was someone who contributed to the legal fees for one of the plaintiffs attacking the Kamehameha School's admissions policy. And so they're using our history against us, or trying to. And one of the first online comments to the editorial was a quote from the 1840 Hawaiian Kingdom Constitution, saying that God hath made of one blood all nations of men to dwell on the earth. This use of our history isn't new. It's been going on for a while, and people have used other parts of our legal history. From the 1852 Constitution, people have been saying, Native Hawaiians shouldn't be treated differently because under their own Constitution, God hath created all men free and equal. Well, as a student of the law, I know that you cannot just read the Constitution and come up with your own interpretation. You have to look at what the courts have done to interpret those types of provisions. When we look at Hawaiian Kingdom law, specifically the Rex versus Booth case, Chief Justice Alicia Allen in 1863 explained why Native Hawaiian specific legislation was not unconstitutional. And he basically said that the importance of some acts of legislation adapted especially to the natives has always been regarded as promotive of the rights and interests of both, and often necessary. He also explained that it has been the gracious policy of the Aboriginal race in whom was vested the legislative power in passing law to apply them exclusively to themselves. And there's nothing else that I think really hammers home the point that modern day laws today that are exclusively applicable to Native Hawaiians is not inconsistent with our history. It's a very strong part of our history, and there's a reason for that. The second point in this presentation is really in the form of a question. If Hawaiian governance is change, what can we learn from other changes? Some of you may be aware of what's been called the Arab Spring, starting in December of 2010. It led to the Egyptian Revolution, and in the Egyptian Revolution, the Egyptian people have been able to force their leader, their President Mubarak, into resignation. I'm fortunate to be a PhD student at the university because I'm in contact with other people. And one of my classmates from Egypt shared with us that President Mubarak's resignation was a good thing, but we did not prepare for what would happen after his resignation. And talking with him further, he made it clear that people emphasize the resignation, which I think if we analyze it to our situation, we don't want to emphasize governance as the destination, but rather what we want to use it for to get where we need to go. And in conclusion, what I would like you all to do is to imagine increased Native Hawaiian home ownership, more Native Hawaiians with higher education, more Native Hawaiians in managerial positions of employment, reduced diabetes among Native Hawaiians, reduced number of Native Hawaiians incarcerated, among a lot of other issues, and think about how governance, whatever model we use, will help us to get to that destination. Mahalo.